Welcome to Talking Together. We are finishing up our rather long discussion on the rebuke, a particular and difficult type of conversation, but one that we have to have sooner or later. Sooner or later, we're in a position where we must correct or rebuke somebody, and if we're avoiding it, that's just as bad as doing it poorly. There are times where people in our lives need correcting, and we're the people to do the job. How do we do it? We have, over the last month or so, shown you all kinds of examples, and one thing that all of them have had in common is they've been very nice. They've been very gentle. And so earlier in the week, I shared with you Galatians chapter 1, verses 1 through 10. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you again. You can stop right now and read it if you would like. But I shared it with you because this is something a little more what we expect when we hear the word rebuke. A little less... a little more in your face, a little more intense, maybe even kind of abrasive. And so we want to look at this and we want to make sure we understand it. What we don't want to do is ignore it or be scared of it. But we also don't want to do this. We don't want to be in a situation where we see Paul here say, let that person be accursed. I am astonished that you were so quickly deserted. We hear this kind of a little bit harsher language, and we go off the rails with it, acting like this somehow excuses us to say whatever we want, whenever we want, and talk out of anger and frustration and all those things we tend to do that we shouldn't be doing. All right, so we want to actually stop and think about what it is, and hopefully you have spent some time this week looking at this text and thinking, what is it here that I can emulate? What is it that Paul is exactly doing as he rebukes and corrects? So if you haven't looked at it and you have a Bible, I would encourage you to open up Galatians chapter 1, verses 1 through 10, and pause right now and take a look at it and read it. If you have already read it, then let's move forward. Here's a few thoughts for your consideration, and as always, I'm very interested in getting feedback from you. But here's what I think. If we're in a position where we think we may need to rebuke or correct someone, there are a couple of steps. And this is based not only on Galatians, but all the examples that we've given. The first thing is you have to know what you're talking about. And I mean that in two different ways. First of all, in terms of subject matter. Okay, we all think we know everything about everything, right? And we're eager to show our opinions these days more maybe than ever. But there are a lot of things that we do not know, right? So we need to make sure that we know what we're talking about when it comes to the subject matter, because it's bad enough that we might cause offense, but it would be even worse if somebody took our advice, they took our correction, and we corrected them in even a worse direction than they were going in the first place. We need to be very, very careful to make sure that we have not just thought it through, but that we have studied, that we have come to a place where we actually know something about what we're talking about. If you don't know what you're talking about, if you've never studied the topic, if you've never really seriously, prayerfully considered the issue, then the best thing you can do is pray for that person and keep your mouth shut in regards to having a conversation. If you don't know what you're talking about, you are not the person to correct or rebuke. All right? Number 2, know what you're talking about, not just in terms of subject matter, but make sure that you are not approaching someone ready to correct and rebuke them based on secondhand information. Make sure you know the person and you know what's going on in that person's life. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, so-and-so is doing this and they're really messed up, and you come full steam ahead right at this person, and it turns out that the person who shared this information with you was inaccurate, then you've done more harm than good. If you don't know the person, if you don't know for sure all your information is secondhand, before you should consider rebuking or correcting, you should sit down and find out what's actually going on face to face with that person. All right? So know your subject matter. Know the subject that you're talking about and know the person that you're talking to. If you have not done those two things, then I would contend You are not in a position where you should be rebuking or correcting that person. Okay? Next, and this kind of goes with that, consider your vocation. You may know what you're talking about. You may know exactly what the person is doing and that they are actually doing it or thinking it. And you know that they need correction. You may potentially still not be the person to rebuke or correct them. It depends on what God has called you to do. For example, if my father, and this is hypothetical, okay, if my father is doing something that he should not be doing, and I know he shouldn't be doing it, and I know something about the subject matter, I still am probably not the person to rebuke my father because he's my father. It should be somebody who's been given some authority in his life who should be rebuking him, not necessarily me. Are there exceptions to that? There are probably exceptions to everything, okay? And I can definitely see situations where children as adults have responsibility for the care of a parent and the parent has dementia. I understand there are probably exceptions. But generally speaking, here are the principles when it comes to doing a rebuke. Make sure you're the right person for the job. We want you to go into this with some certainty, with some assurance that you're doing what you should be doing. Okay? So please make sure that you have the proper authority to do it. If you don't, again, pray for that person who needs the correction and pray for the person or people who are in a position where that correction should be given by them. Pray for those people, all right? That they would come together and that God would work through them and that the correction that's necessary would take place. This is an important role that we often forfeit because we just jump right into the rebuke. Don't jump right into the rebuke if these three things, knowing your subject matter, knowing the actual situation that's going on, and your vocation haven't first been considered. All right? Now, if you've done all of that, you know your subject matter, you know for sure what the situation of that person is, and you consider your vocation and you are absolutely convinced, yes, God has called me into a position of authority where it is my responsibility to rebuke or correct this person, then do it. Do it. Right? Then you're in a good position to do it. I would borrow from Clement Preuss in a book, The Fire and the Staff, that he wrote. When it comes to this, though, make sure that you are rebuking with that person's best interest in the mind, right? So, in other words, you always want to yield to the weak. If somebody, especially if we're talking about faith, if there's a spiritual issue, if spiritually they're weak, then you yield to them. In other words, what that means is, for example, be patient with them, right? If you know something they don't know, if you have come to understand something they don't understand, I promise you didn't figure that out overnight. Somebody was patient with you. Somebody afforded you time. Be patient with them. Afford them time like you were given, right? So be patient even as you're rebuking. Rebuke and impatience, they don't go together, right? They don't go together. Patience and a rebuke and correction, they belong together. Same thing. Again, if we're talking about the person's faith like we are in our Galatians reading, then it's important that you not in any way be reckless with another person's faith. Treat that faith as something that is precious and gentle. That's what you're trying to preserve or grow. Don't be reckless with it. This is the thing that matters. This is why you're coming to them, to help them in their faith, to encourage the faith, to strengthen the faith, right? To guide them back to the faith. This is the purpose. So be patient and don't be reckless with that person's faith, right? Now, in terms of the harshness thing, I would contend again, and this is why I use the Galatians, that there is a time and a place to be harsh, to be very stern with your words. But notice that as stern as Paul gets with the church in Galatia, at least in the part that I read to you, is verse 6, where he says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. He's disappointing, and he's expressing that disappointment That's not terribly harsh. Where it gets harsh is not when he's talking to these people whose faith is in jeopardy. He gets harsh when he's talking about those people who are jeopardizing their faith, right? Do you see that? Okay, so the rebuke is about protecting the people's faith. But when people come in, for example, when I as a pastor have responsibility for this particular flock, for me here at Concordia, when somebody, I've been given authority, I've been given a responsibility, I am the preacher and teacher for this congregation. If somebody from outside of this congregation comes in and tries to upset that authority with false teaching and puts at jeopardy the faith of my congregation, then they're going to bear the full brunt of some very harsh words. I'm not going to be nice about those people who are teaching false teaching. For the sake of the people that I have been called to serve, they're going to get both barrels, right? This is using your God-given authority to protect those people under your care, right? We cannot allow people to subvert the authority that was given to us to protect people, because when that happens, the people that we have been called to protect are harmed, and we don't want that to happen. Brothers and sisters, this is leadership, and it may not be easy for those of us who don't like conflict, but this is leadership. And that's the sort of leadership that Paul is showing here. He is an apostle. He is the founder of this church. He is responsible for the preaching and teaching that is going on within this congregation. And there is false teaching, and he is not tolerating it, not one bit. He is speaking out against it. Let them be accursed. Let anyone who preaches a gospel that isn't really the gospel be accursed. He speaks very harshly and appropriately so. This is leadership. If you want to look at the opposite example where this is not done well, then turn to Genesis chapter 2. Adam was given the same responsibility, right, over his wife, Eve. He was given this authority and this responsibility. God's word was given to him. It was his responsibility to share that wonderful gift with his wife. And when the devil comes, Adam is there and he doesn't speak up. He allows the devil to speak. He allows the devil to say something that is contrary to God's word. That's not leadership. He should have spoken up. He should have, right? So we stand up to the person who would harm the faith of our neighbor. And that is when it may be appropriate, again, not to speak out of frustration, not even to speak in anger, but to speak the truth, unabashedly. That's wrong. This is right. This is the gospel. This is God's word, right? Don't go that way. Don't listen to that person. They're wrong. They're being foolish. Whatever you need to say for the sake of the people that you have been called to protect, right? Really interested in your feedback here. Hope to hear from some of you. I'm going to keep doing this because I think it's important, but I have to say I'm not getting much feedback. So I would really love to hear your thoughts, and especially if you disagree, let me know. There may be something that I need to correct or maybe change the way I've said something, and I'd appreciate your thoughts and your help. God bless you all. Keep having the good conversations. Keep going after those meaningful conversations. Our culture needs them. God bless you.